the most powerful stories in film, in books, in advertising, a lot of them resonate universally because they're specific.
Hey everyone, it's your go-to curiosity champion, Cynthia Harris, founder of 828 Insights and host of Research Revealed, the podcast where we dig into the complexities and the brilliance of the insights industry. We'll focus on business and have a little fun too. Let's jump in. Super excited to have this conversation with you. I'm really grateful that you're taking the time to talk about things related to research and brand building. And on this podcast, we only talk to the best. And I think that you're amongst the best to do this work. And so very excited. We are lucky that we share a couple of clients in common and have had the opportunity to work together, which has been a privilege. But I am just excited to hear what's been going on in your world and talk about things related to research. So to kick us off, I would love if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about your role as a strategy director at Wieden+Kennedy.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, first off, I appreciate you asking me on, flattered about the compliments. It was a joy to work with you as well. So for me, I've been at Wieden for about 4 years now, and have during that time got promoted into a strategy director, and it's been great. I think I'm fortunate to be able to do what I really love. Like I would do, this is the way that I think, this is the way that, the types of things that excite me, just in my personal regular life. And so to be able to essentially get paid to tell people what you think about things, is kind of cool. So, I've worked on a variety of brands in my time there. Right now, I'm primarily on Delta Airlines, but in the past, I've worked on Sprite. We worked on Hennessy together. I've worked on Vitamin Water, the Nets, a few different things. Right now, Delta Airlines is the main thing I'm on.
Awesome. I'm a big customer of Delta Airlines, so I probably see your work all the time. Me and Delta
Yeah,
go together really bad. So
yeah, we love that.
talk to me a little bit, Donovan. You said this is the way you think, and you love to be able to work in a space that aligns with how you think. How would you describe
Yeah.
how you think?
Um, I think for me, I am always just drawn to emotional nuance, and people in conversations is just moments when somebody says something, or you read something or you hear something that just puts a specific, I don't know, draws attention to an emotional reality somebody's experiencing. I mean, not to say that it has to be for a specific reason, but just being able to chew on things, kind of connect. Like I think my style of strategy often is pulling from a lot of disparate places and showing how, they're connected through principle or connected through emotion or connected through any number of things. When I see this connection, when I see this experience, that excites me, and like I want to share. Like I by nature, I just want to share things I've learned to other people, or share things that I think are especially beautiful to other people. And so I think this is a job that is exactly that, where your job is to excite creatives, excite clients, excite whatever room that you're in with things that are going on in the world, things that are going on with people, things that are going on, Instagram,
Mhm.
whatever the music, whatever the case may be. So yeah, I think I would do that for free, and I'm glad I don't have to.
I know that's right. Look, we just have to be honest about it. You could do it for
Yeah,
free, but I'm glad you're not
yeah,
doing it for free. Uh, so, you know what I want to dig into a little bit more, Donovan? You talked about emotional nuance, and I know that Wyden
yeah.
is exceptional when it comes to emotional storytelling and bringing that into how you do work, how you create creative, and how you guys bring ideas to life. What I'm curious about is what is the balance between data and making data
Hmm.
driven decisions and allowing creatives to kind of go with their gut and to lean into that
Hmm.
emotional nuance. Can you talk a little bit about how you guys balance the data rigor with the emotional rigor?
I guess for me, there's never really been mutually exclusive or one or the other. I think sometimes when we say data, we sort of it becomes the bummer. At least on the creative side, it becomes the bummer of like, oh, I just feel this, so like, why do I need to validate it? Or it becomes, people think of it as purely statistics or purely some sort of business numbers. But I think something that one of my former mentors and bosses helped to show me early in my career is data is anything. It can be a stat, but it can also be a lyric that that a lot of people are really resonating with. It can also be a book. It can be a quotation. It can be a poem. It could be a trend that you've picked up that you've stitched together through TikTok and Instagram. Like data is just information about the world and people. I don't know who said it, but there's this quote that um, everything that needs to be said has already been said, but since no one was listening, everything has to be said again.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, I often will find a lot like insight about something right now from books that are 40 years old or from, research discoveries that happened, years ago or different in a different sector. And so to me, I think the data just helps make an idea more sellable, especially when you're in the business context. This is commercial art, not art. You have to have involved clients. You have to have someone buy your idea. And so it helps to support and bolster, but also it just helps to ground in um, something real. And even I think what I often find is I might have a gut intuition that turns out to be true, but through folding in the, a specific data point, whether it be a TikTok videos, whether it be a stat or whatever, my intuition suddenly has more dimension. And I'm able to, even if I intuitively thought that that thing was real and it recognized it, it helped to put a point on it. And I think with our work, so much of it is about the sharpness of the nuance, because that's what people feel.
I love it. I think of data a lot, Donovan, is kind of the closed captioning of a story, where it's like
Mm,
sometimes you don't get the story if you're just looking at a story on mute. But if you have the closed captions, you can kind of understand what's going on because you're looking at it, you're hearing it, you're reading it. So I love the way you articulated it. I'm also reminded of Dochi. I was thinking about Dochi, who just won that Grammy recently, and she just has an amazing creative story, and it's one of just great authenticity. And I heard her say recently that she reached a point in her life where she just wanted to start producing creative. And if she would have waited for data to produce, we would have never seen who Dochi is as an artist and as a contributor to culture. And so I'm just grateful for people like her that just kind of push past what feels
yeah.
uncomfortable to get to creative brilliance. Are there other people that inspire you out there today that are pushing past perhaps their barriers to creativity?
Yeah, I mean, I'm inspired by Doechii. In the music realm, inspired by Doechii, inspired by Tyler, the creator, inspired by Donovan Kendrick certainly this year, but just more broadly, I don't know, because it's so easy for creativity in whatever realm you're in, whether it's advertising, whether it's film, whether it's music, it's so easy for it to become an imitation of something else where, you see that this trend is going, so, and all of these things you could say are backed by data. But I think something that I'm especially drawn to, particularly with people I admire, but just generally my own personal interest is, um, toward, you know, uh, invention and creation and, um, it sounds so trite to say something we haven't seen before, but I think for me, particularly in advertising, I look through the lens as a person who um, representation and having advertising resonate more equitably with more people. For me, there's so much that our work hasn't done because of the ways in which we have caked so many biases and the same styles of humor, the same styles of emotion, sentimentality, even all of these things that we feature in our work that we use to resonate with people and make emotional stories. For me, it feels like there's still so many things we haven't seen because of who's behind the steering wheel or because of the legacy biases.
I love it. And I think that we're going to have to work together as an industry to preserve the ability to tell those stories that are different. We think a lot at 828 about, taking clients into uncomfortable spaces so that they can feel something that will help them do something differently. And, we've been lucky that we've been able to do that together firsthand. But how do you envision that we're going to be able to preserve the voices that are on the fringes that aren't necessarily always on stage, so to speak, inside these brands? What can we be doing as strategists and researchers to make sure that we're preserving those stories that are perhaps on the fringe?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things is evaluating the foundations, or honestly just evaluating the beliefs that we're carrying with us for what good creativity and good work looks like. I just
Hmm.
released an essay that is about questioning our fundamentals and thinking about how so many of the things that we've been handed down from our managers, the books, the advertising books, or I don't want to make, creativity more broadly, of the principles like this is how you get to something good and resonant. But you consider, I think it's 47 out of 50 of the top 50 advertising books were written by white men.
Hmm.
You just take that, speaking of data point alone, where, you're in market research and, what brand would move forward with any confidence about resonating with a sample size that's that skewed, particularly with brands that say they market to the general market or the masses or whatever. They're often specifically looking to root their work in something quote unquote universal, something that is inherently speaking to everyone. And so, in which case we can swap anyone in there and that'll tell that story. But I think for me, something, particularly in the, thinking about creativity toward newness, but also really resonating with people. The most powerful stories in film and books and advertising, a lot of them resonate universally because they're specific. They're coming from a specific truth with a specific group of people, lived experience. I want to say the dazzle of difference, but that sounds so corny. But there is a magnetism to something unique that you hadn't considered. Like I think about the film Turning Red, that's about, a young Chinese Canadian, middle schooler and her experience and with her mom and her culture and all of those things coming together and telling this really beautiful story. But it's not actually like me as a black man that is not a teenager still is resonating with it. And I think something that the Domi Shi, the director of it, she talked about when making the film. She is saying, what is the culturally specific thing that we are pulling from to then make the universal? And I think a lot of times we just try to look at, what does everyone feel and what's the lowest
Hmm.
common denominator that was going to hit? And we'll take focus group research and it's like the one black person in the room or the one queer person in the room might have said something, but like not enough people said it. So it's like, that's not the universal thing, but it was magnetic.
Hmm.
There was something to it that even though the other people that resonated with it may not be in the room or may not feel that through that lens and context, we're all talking about the same feelings. It's just about the context surrounding it. And so I think mining and honoring um, fringe truths and not just settling for the lowest common denominator, I think is one way to definitely to incorporate fringe people and communities.
I love it. I love it. I want to hear a little bit more too, Donovan. Let's just call a spade a spade. There are times that creative agencies don't necessarily align with what a brand wants, right? And there are times that we're called in as an agency to play Switzerland, where it's like, a brand might hire us to then say like, hey, let's all get on the same page about a thing. Can you talk about a time when perhaps you as an agency, a creative agency, didn't necessarily agree with what a client said? And how do you then get on the same page so that you're working towards the same insight, the same
Uh-huh.
universal truth, to use your language? And I think it's common language for all of us. But how do you think about concessions or the process to get to an insight that is going to unlock amazing creative?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that obviously naturally happens, and I think there was one example where there was a brand that we had been operating with their US based clients and had an understanding of this particular brand and their relationship with their audience and especially their core audience that was diverse and was able to and that brand was popular because of the diversity of that core. And then you had global clients come into the fray that didn't necessarily have the cultural context to understand how important these people are. And again, those legacy beliefs started coming up of like, oh, we've got to get to something universal. We don't want to be too niche because we need to talk to everybody. And all of these, whether it be B school principles or just generally things that we think are so intuitive that they feel right. And coming from a place of like, no, we don't want to exclude, but actually by negating this core or treating them as if they aren't as valuable to your brand as they are, this whole tower could crumble. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think in that particular instance, they're naturally entangled with this when you're
Mm-hmm.
involving communities and audiences that um, whose identity is so tied to whether it be race, whether it be gender. And sometimes clients who don't come from those groups sort of treat it, it's like, oh, we're just having an intellectual debate, not
Mm-hmm. Of
realizing
course.
that
Mm-hmm.
you had to work up to say this thing and are going to go home angry about this thing. But one of the things that I think I often try to do is offer context as much as I can, and not just make it about a subjective argument. To your point about data, is where you're, okay, this is a gap for you. This is a blind spot. How do you fill a blind spot that can be subjective? Is through data and all sorts of data, whether it be statistics about the smallness of the group, but the influence of the group. And so, bringing in different data points like Black creators were something like 5 to 10 times more influential than their white counterparts, but were getting paid much less. You know what
I
I
knew
mean?
I knew that butt was coming. I knew the butt was
Yeah,
coming.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It always comes. It always comes. And it's one of those things that, particularly for people who are just looking through the lens of size, you will always favor the white community. You will always favor, well, men aren't size wise, but just like legacy will just like, oh, men, whatever. You always favor, heterosexual relationships, whatever the case may be. But then, so to bring this data point of, yes, size may be the case, not be in this community's favor, but look of influence, like if this person says that this thing is cool, they not only, and the data showed that they not only influence people who come from that same community, they also influence others outside of that community. And so, filling in, presentations and conversation through the lens of, I think, this is really, these kind of conversations is really when data comes in handy, where you're able to like, oh, this isn't a subjective argument anymore. This is just
Mhm.
like, see, look,
The facts are the
uh,
facts. I am so curious, and I've been chewing on this idea for a while, but I feel like connection in this new world order, so to speak, it's going to have to look different because, especially here in the United States, we're just in a very divided time. I think we can all agree that as a country, we're very divided, but we're even seeing it on a global level that things are just feeling very divided. So when you think about the core of what we do as researchers and as advertisers, connection is such a central piece of that. How do you think that connection, if you think connection should evolve, how do you think connection needs to evolve so that we can still get to the core truths, which are, fact-based, insight-based truths that help us
mm,
deliver. How do you think connections should evolve, if at all?
for me personally, and I'm not saying this for all strategists or all strategy directors, for me personally, I don't just want my work to be successful, or effective. I want it to do all of those things, but with anything that I do, I want it to be additive. I don't just want it to be neutral. Certainly don't want it to be negative. I want it to add something of value out in the world, and that could be any number of things. And I think sometimes, particularly for brands, that is where the most powerful ideas come, when you're not just considering what is it that we can say. It's more of, what is it that the world needs our brand to say right now? Or what is it that the world needs from us? I don't mean that in simply through the context of social justice but more of, each brand is trying to root in an emotional idea and trying to connect with some part of culture. And I think when it comes to connection, and when it comes to, so many points of connection evaporating, so many points of seeming, commonality seeming to evaporate. I think there is a space and a need and a thirst for brands to, um, not necessarily go the route of like, we're all one people, like, put aside our differences, because there are very real differences. There are wars going on. There are children being, murdered, and like there are real things that I think aren't just as frivolous as like, let's just all come together. But I think something powerful that our work can do is to show people to themselves, remind people of themselves, remind people of things that, oh, I actually was, I didn't think you would take me there, but I actually do believe in this specific thing. I think back to, Hunger Games, when the Hunger Game film franchise was coming out. And it was right around the time that I think Trayvon Martin had been murdered, and several other things were happening on social current, and there were protests and things like that. And I don't think this is with the film's intention because they come from books and things, but there was an interesting way in which that film offered emotional context for protest,
Mm-hmm.
where it's a white woman protagonist, but they're revolting against an oppressive, system. And I think, whether folk realized it or not, I'm sure that there were people who were looking down on Black people in the streets protesting as like, oh, they're rioting or whatever, who saw that film. And even if they didn't maybe change their opinion fully, their empathy maybe got dimensionalized a bit. And I think our work, whether, and I don't know that it has to be always ham-fisted or heavy-handed or serious, but I think our work can do that and rise to the times.
Yeah. It's interesting you bring up this idea of protesting and, we're seeing it in the zeitgeist today. I'm sure you've seen it, but there's a lot of silent protesting going on, specifically
Yeah.
from the 92% of Black women who, very
Mm.
verbally are saying, no, I'm not going to speak on certain topics. And so, I'm curious, have you thought at all about these silent protests of sorts that are happening and how or if that might impact how we reach audiences that feel left out of the conversations? We can't ignore what's happening, particularly here in the United States in terms of DEI,
Mm.
shifting from a federal landscape perspective. But, you know, what are your thoughts on these silent protests that are out there and how might that change how we do our work?
Yeah, I mean, people don't feel heard. People feel dismissed, and they feel like their value to these brands and companies isn't being seen and heard. You think about, Target and the 40-day protest of that brand, that from their backtracking of DEI and the ways in which so many of their core customers felt betrayed, where, okay, yes, you said you put these Black owned businesses in your company and you put us in the ads, but then when it was time to show up, you crumbled, you withered. And I think, regardless of the group or community that feels that way, a lot of brands do feel that way. I think something that I've begun to think more about for brands, is for the brands I work on, at least, is oftentimes we're trying to solve business problems when it's really a relationship problem. Last year did a lot of research on relationship psychology and what happens when, relationships break down. And it tended to come down to three things. It was like, regardless of the argument topic, it was about care, concern, respect and recognition, or power and control. Everything tended to come down to one of those three things. And in a brand context, you think about something, just, it's an easy example, Target. This is about care and concern, and in some ways respect and recognition. But really, it's like, oh, you showed in a very loud way you don't care about us. And so if I'm Target, it's not just first I would think about, maybe we should have stood on business. But outside of that, I don't think it's just oh, how can we, PR damage this thing, or like, look at it from a PR perspective, or look at it from a business perspective, volume, traffic. No, think about it as a relationship, like repair the care and concern to your community members who are, by the way, it's not just Black. There are many, other communities of color that that equally feel slighted. There are white allies who feel like, nah, this isn't right. Like, there's so many people that you have hurt by doing this. And so I know you started with silent protest specifically among Black women. I think, looking at it through the lens of relationships, I'd say would be one thing that I might offer up.
That's beautiful. The idea of relationship, I think, is really an interesting way to dimensionalize it, because it does feel like, to use the Target example, it almost feels like an infidelity has happened. And so it will be
Yeah.
interesting to see how they try to repair it, right? Because, we both know how it has typically happened in the past. It's like, let's PR this issue away. But the truth
Mhm.
is, it is expensive to win people back. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I just wonder, when you think about brands that are being forced to make a stand or decide not to, can you talk a little bit, Donovan, about what it takes to earn people's trust back when it comes to getting them back to believing that their brand cares about them? Because,
Yeah.
when the infidelity happens, you might take your man back, but it might take a minute.
Yeah. It
Just
might
saying.
take a minute for sure. Absolutely. As it should. And I think the word you just said, earn, is is probably the biggest thing. I don't have a ton of examples that come to mind of brands that have successfully done this. But I think um, sincerity and vulnerability are, how you do it in real life. You let your partner down, you let your parent down, you let your kid down. It's not about like a quick or bad and like here's a showering you with gifts. It's not about it's you gotta really show some humility. And I think something that companies are often afraid to do is to show any sign of weakness, to show any sign that they made a legitimate mistake that they shouldn't have. There's an ease in explaining something away or just reverting to like, it'll blow over or whatever. And I think my, and maybe this is taking us too far left, but I think my experience is the emotional shortcomings of people tend to extend into the brands. You have people who are running these companies who are incapable of looking at themselves and to hold their capacity to do damage with other people, so they have relationships where they're dominating the relationship and not apologizing. They have, they're have some wound in their own personal life that prevents them from being apologetic or prevents them from having a level of self-awareness that would be able to be conscious of the impact they have on others. Like these are all like personal human things, but the issue is folk in power then move forward with that sort of thing where it's like, oh, people are saying bad things about my brand. Oh no, it couldn't be true. Like, I mean, you have to be exaggerating. Like, you
Mm-hmm.
got gaslighters everywhere. I don't mean to disparaging, but you have humans everywhere. So far AI is not in charge. It's still people, and so I think if I had to wave a magic wand on how to solve a lot of these problems, I would point it toward people in power healing themselves, and then let's see where we get to after that.
Mm-hmm. Oh gosh. Yeah. I'll wave my wand as well to hopefully see that change. But it is
Yeah.
so interesting because I do think our own experiences reflect in even the work that we do, which is why it is so important to have, different types of people around the table, of course. But I do think it's important for us to do the introspective work. I have a 9-year-old nephew who I'm super close to, and more than a couple of times I've had to apologize to him. He's 9
Mm,
years old, but it's like
yeah.
I've had to say like, "Hey, I don't have the emotional capacity to talk to you about that right now," right? Like
Mm,
auntie needs a minute. And I do think that
mm,
learning how to be emotionally vulnerable even to a kid, it makes me
mm.
better at the work that I do because you're right that it
Absolutely.
takes a level of humility to be able to connect. What do you wish that market researchers knew to better enable the work that you do as a strategy director? What do you feel like researchers can do to amplify your work and what you need from researchers to be excellent?
Yeah, I mean, first I think I have um as envy in a way of, so much of market research, particularly qualitative, is time sitting in rooms, hearing from people, learning from people. And so there's, whereas on our side, there's often not as much time to, do the person on the street interviews or do the, sit in all the focus groups. And so I think there's a wealth of knowledge, but I think if I had a wand or if I had an offering, it would maybe be the understanding the difference between interesting and useful.
Mm,
I think that, if you're in market research, you have an innate deep curiosity about people and you get excited, you get excited when people are telling you things that you can imagine as like being especially useful and interesting. And like, you want to go share, like, I want to go share interesting things that I've heard in focus groups and things of that nature. But I think, in the sharing process from conversation to we have to then use this to inform potentially just 30 seconds or potentially, a brand, being able to understand the specific objectives and intentions with a brand. And this is sometimes impossible if you're not close enough, but being able to distill into, we're going to share everything we got, but like, a filter maybe of toward the things that are especially, seem especially useful versus fascinating, but maybe I have to dig through 10 fascinating things to get to the useful thing.
Super helpful. That makes a lot of sense. And you're making me think of something else I wanted to chat with you about. And that is, can you talk about a time when there was an insight that was especially useful and it perhaps changed the way you approach strategy, or it changed the way you briefed creatives on executing? Is there a particular insight that you can think of that was salient in that way, that was useful and not just
Mhm.
interesting? Please.
Yeah. So I used to work on the lottery. Back when I was living and working in Atlanta, and it was oddly one of my favorite things like their proceeds went to help education and just the world of possibility and things like that was just a fun, interesting brand to think about. We did on these ride-alongs that for people who are scratching or buying tickets and things like that, and just understanding motivations for folk. And I think one of the things that was really interesting was so much of the lottery advertising is focused on the big jackpots, because obviously that is the huge thing that hits $1 billion like all the time now, which is crazy. I don't think that should
I
be
may
the
have
case,
played
but
a time or two. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, on the bad days I play.
but in those conversations, you get to understand that yes, there's a huge swath of people that like that is the motivation, the biggest number. When you talk to them, they talk about the $100 wins that meant that they were going to go out to dinner with their spouse on a Friday night. And that was special for them. Or the just $10, $15, like, oh, 200, the smaller amounts, A, felt more likely, and then B, translated into immediate moments of treating yourself, where it's like not changing your life, but it is this moment of like, oh, I was going into the weekend after a long week, just planning to order, uh, Papa John's. But like, nah, we're going to cheesecake. We're going to ball at cheesecake. We got $100 from the scratcher, and I think that was something that definitely helped inform some other ways we began to think about how we might connect with folk.
That's amazing. And that's why you're good at what you do. You're able to, and I've always admired this about you, you're able to take the world not just in the immediate, but in the surrounding elements of the world and distill it into a truth that really can transform the way we think about creative. And I love how you study life. You are obviously wicked good when it comes to being a creative director, strategy director, but I've just always admired how you studied life outside of the objective. And so I'm grateful that you've shared your wisdom with us today.
Ah, that's
Uh,
super sweet. Thank you so much.
of course. So, okay. We end every interview with 8 rapid fire questions. You don't have to think too hard about them, but just want to kind of know what immediately comes to mind. So, what's the first
Yeah.
word that comes to mind when you hear market research?
Helpful.
What's one buzzword in research or marketing that you would love to retire?
um, AA for African American. I think just say black, like includes more people. I'm tired of it.
Yeah. Okay. Well noted. Name a brand that you feel like gets consumer connection right.
Telfar.
And
Yeah.
I'm sitting right here with my Telfar.
With a Telfie, you see it.
Telfie, you see it. Uh,
Yeah.
would you rather have more time or more budget for a project?
Budget. I
Fill
need,
in
I
the
need some,
blank.
I need the money. Yeah.
Yeah, show me the money. Show me the money. Fill in the blank. The future of marketing research is
Is more intimate.
name one book, podcast, or article that every marketing researcher or brand builder should enjoy.
There isn't one. I think you can find something valuable anywhere.
Okay. And last, actually, 2 more questions. What was your dream job when you were a kid?
I think I wanted to be a comic or like a chef, one of the two, maybe a funny chef.
Okay, I like it. I like
Yeah,
it. And then last but not least, coffee or tea?
coffee for
Okay.
sure.
Well, Donovan, you're incredible. Thank you again for taking the time. And I'm just grateful for the friendship that we've built and just to catch up with you. We need to spend more time even outside of this to catch up on all the things. But thank you so much.
For sure. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.